XCOM is a turn-based franchise we all know and love that will tell us again and again that everyone we care about will die because you were stupid and didn't check your corners. The original game came out in the mid-1990s from the minds of Julian Gollop and Microprose Studios, and it taught us that the world does not wait for us or to finish our cool technology that will give us an edge in the fight. You gotta go now. XCOM's unforgiving but still fair nature made it such an amazing game, and it spawned some amazing sequels. But there's some other stuff involved. Some stuff that, if you were a veteran of the series, you have blotted from your mind was blunt force trauma and alcohol. Or if you're new to the series and only came in during the 2012 reboots, your veteran friends didn't tell you because they cared about you and didn't want to hurt you. Well, guess what? I don't care about you, so it's time for you to learn the ugly truth about XCOM. Let's start with the immediate sequel of the original XCOM game, Terror from the Deep. Terror from the Deep was pretty much a reskin of the original game with some new plot, as the developers at Microprose were only given 6 months to make a new game right off the heels of the original. Like, I gotta be honest, even though the game is just a difficulty tweak and can pass for a conversion mod, given 6 months, that's really impressive right there. The game's okay, and if you like the original XCOM, you'll like Terror from the Deep. But aside from additional plot development, which involves the aliens now are oceanic, and you go there to kill them, and you accidentally create a catastrophe that would make Roland Emmerich cream his pants for disaster movie plots, not much happens. Things get good 2 years later, though, with XCOM Apocalypse. Julian Gollop is back on the scene. We've got actual time to make a sequel that deserves to be called a sequel. Apocalypse was great. The game now takes place in some sort of mega city instead of the whole world because you kind of ruined the world in the last game. And now instead of funding from countries, you get funding from quasi-political groups that range from the mega corporation that controls literally all the food that anyone has to eat, to alien apologist groups that are eventually just going to attack you anyway, so you may as well kick their teeth in. The player actions go beyond just choosing to save a place or ignore an alien incursion. Now, if you say, save a building, but you destroy a lot of stuff in the process, that will actually make you lose favor with the political group that building is part of, because they don't like it when you end up leveling their building just to kill a couple of interdimensional aliens. Which should get me to the plot of this game. The plot takes place a few decades after Terror from the Deep, and now the aliens are extra-dimensional and the original aliens are just kind of living there. You eventually research how to get over there, and then in a plot upset that would make even Mass Effect blush, it turns out the evil behind the aliens is fucking midichlorians from Star Wars. That's right, XCOM did midichlorians a few years before the Phantom Menace did. I'm not making this up. They're called the Micronoid Aggregate. Where XCOM Apocalypse really stood out, though, was its adaptive difficulty settings beyond just choosing what difficulty map you wanted. If the game got wise to the fact that you knew what you were doing and just trying to be good on an easy map, it would eventually send extremely hard enemies against you. Say you knew what you were doing, killed all the early incursions really fast, and raided the right enemy bases right off the bat. The game would decide to send an early raid to your base, featuring mid to late game enemies with very high-end tech, which most of the time you are completely unprepared for even if you are good. Alternatively, if you really sucked and were struggling through the first few incursions, the game would decide to take it easy on you and send sporadic incursions that don't really challenge a seasoned player. Almost as if the extra-dimensional aliens didn't take the threat of an unprepared XCOM very seriously, and therefore just wrote you off. But now, let's pull ourselves out of the world of games for a bit and into the world of game development. In the late 90s, Microprose got bought out by Hasbro, who wanted to make Hasbro Interactive, because they saw Monopoly as money, and they saw video games as money, so why not make video games money? And everything went to hell. Hasbro just did that thing that sometimes big companies do, where they want to expand into a new market, so they decide rather than doing their own R&D, they'll just buy up a bunch of other people who already know what to do, and then use their existing intellectual property and goodwill to churn out anything they can think of, and it all ends up being garbage. The first example of this is XCOM First Alien Invasion. First Alien Invasion was a multiplayer game that used a play-by-email system. And while the game itself supposedly wasn't too bad, which, disclaimer here, I have no way of knowing because the game is nearly impossible to play now, the system that it used, the play-by-email, was very quickly abandoned after a couple years, and left the game in a state where, unless you want to do an obscenely elaborate series of tasks to do one turn cycle between you and your friend, it is nigh impossible to play this game. In fact, I believe the way to revive this game was only discovered a few years ago. Another, slightly less depressing example, because you can still play this, is XCOM Interceptor, which, while still developed by Microprose, this was the first game where Hasbro was considered the person in charge, and it kinda shows. The tactical combat is abandoned in favor of dogfighting sims, and everything feels a lot easier. The first handful of sorties in this game, which is about as far as I can get thanks to the fact this game likes to crash a lot, and supposedly there was a patch that existed to fix it on modern systems, however it has disappeared from the internet. But yeah, they're all really easy. You shoot things, you go through, it really feels stripped down. Particularly the research portion of this game. Whereas you would originally need to manage scientists and what have you in order to get more of your research done in a more efficient manner, research is now downloaded based on Earthside laboratories, and really all you can really do is click, I want this one, and they send it to you. It still takes time, but it's a lot less satisfying. The kind of saving grace of this game is the story serves as a nice way to link what happened between Terror from the Deep and the events of XCOM Apocalypse, where supposedly, after figuring out FTL and all that stuff, XCOM is reactivated to help interstellar mining companies gather resources for Earth since they've ran out of Valyrium. So surprise, surprise, the aliens aren't really comfortable with you wandering out of your planet after the ass-whooping you gave them in the last two chronological games. A big issue Interceptor faced, which is especially exacerbated in modern times, is it came out at that point in gaming history where games were far enough along to be extremely complicated, but not quite far enough along to where they could allocate dedicated space for a comprehensive tutorial or basic stuff beyond like tooltips in the UI. I ended up having to print out an 130-page manual for this game due to the fact that this game also does not like it when you tab out, and trying to view PDFs on Steam is garbage. The kicker is, too, the very last page of the manual is, hey, you want to really know how to play the game? Here's a 1-900 hotline that'll teach you everything. You're still gonna have to pour through that manual anyway just to figure out how the hell to fly your ship. There's a bigger, but not as much talked about problem with this game that I really, once I thought about it, wow, this game was a horrible blunder. You see, XCOM Interceptor came out 3 months after Volition, the company that was known for the Descent series at a time, launched Free Space, The Great War, which is one of the best space sim fighter games ever. Like seriously, why is Free Space not getting a reboot? And seriously, it just looks like the Battleborn to Free Space's Overwatch, where XCOM Interceptor still has that pseudo 3D pixely look to it. You can tell that Free Space is polygons and everything looks so much better. And frankly, I don't mind that I don't need to manage a base or do research in Free Space when the gameplay is just that much better. Now, if we backtrack to right after Terror from the Deep got released, Microprose Studios was working on a tactical first-person shooter project called XCOM Alliance. Alliance was supposed to be a tactical first-person squad shooter where you control your AI buddies, going through a base on Mars that was left behind by the aliens, or so we thought. It would explain what happened between Terror from the Deep and Interceptor and how humanity got a hold of all that extra technology, and it looked really promising, especially in what we saw from the E3 demos in 1999. And it got shit-canned. Allegedly, the story goes that some team member that was absolutely integral to the finalizing of the development of this game decided to leave late in development, and they had to scrap everything because they were just lost without this one person. No reason was given why this person left, and I'm not even sure it was said who left, although I'm probably wrong on that count. But we're left wondering what if. And this little bit of the video here would be where I have the update where I tell you about how a demo of the XCOM Alliance got leaked out, and eventually someone was able to bootstrap it to the Unreal Engine and get it working. However, all the links were posted back in, I believe, 2011 or 2012, and when I tried to download this demo, none of them worked. They're all dead. So aside from a couple YouTube videos that I'll link of people playing through this game, there's nothing really left of this. And that's a huge shame because it looks like it would have been a really cool game to play. Of course, though, Hasbro still wanted to see some return on all that work and all that investment, so they quickly recouped what was left of the team and made XCOM Enforcer. This has to be the biggest fuck you to the XCOM series that ever exists, and ironically, it was a canon, or not, I don't know what this is. It's an abomination, that's what this is. You play as some sort of cyborg, robot android thing that was built at the last minute by this scientist and possibly Rob Liefeld. And you just run around gunning down aliens in third person. There's no turns, there's no strategy. You just rampage through various maps, occasionally collecting letters like this is Tony Hawk's Pro Skater that'll lead you to a cute little bonus level. All the while, this tropey, stereotypical scientist type is saying really stupid stuff in your ear.
I've got some cleaning up to do around here.
What the fuck is this?
And the gang's all here. We got Sectoid, knockoff brand Hydralisk, Jimmy, and Trailer Trash. Oh, and get this, you can still do research in this game. The research just explodes out of the enemies when you kill them. Like, really, that's all there is. You just collect up a bunch of these and then you give them to the nerd guy and it makes your bullets shoot faster. There's one final game from this Hasbro era, however. Another game that never saw the light of day, and perhaps the most disappointing of them all. XCOM Genesis. Genesis was supposed to be a 3D reboot of the original XCOM game running on its own engine and staying pretty faithful to the source material. It had a huge team for the time, comprising of all sorts of types from all walks of development. It seems that somebody had finally convinced the suits at Hasbro to let them actually make an XCOM game instead of just slapping the XCOM name onto popular styles of games. Based on some leftover scraps floating around the internet, they actually got a lot done in this game, and it looked like it was pretty close to being something they could ship. The models are there, the geoscape's there, there's a bit of a tech demo going on to show that everything works. Probably it just needed hammering out and what have you. But Hasbro Interactive was in full cut and run mode, selling off all their game properties, all their developer studios, and everything got split up in the end. I think most of the team went on to make Robotech or something. That's just what Wikipedia says. I can't find much on it. So the XCOM name goes dormant for well over a decade until 2K Firaxis bring it back from the dead. The public's introduced to a bunch of promo videos and what looked like in-game footage in an E3 of I don't care when, because all I remember is all the fans at the time of the original series went into a huge tizzy about third-person shooters and what have you, which admittedly now I understand why they'd be so upset about that after I played the garbage known as XCOM Enforcer. But lo and behold, in 2012 we got XCOM Enemy Unknown. A kind of faithful, but not really because we streamlined it, rendition of the original XCOM series. And it was really nice. Time units, or agility points, whatever you want to call them, are gone in favor of a two-phase move for each individual soldier. The aliens now have to see you in order for you to shoot them, except mysteriously in the tutorial mission that's not the case. And for the most part, the element of surprise is gone. Scientist management is still there. But it's still a fun game that you end up sinking hundreds of hours into, and it's well crafted by all accounts. Then came the Bureau, and that sort of ruined everything. The Bureau. XCOM Declassified. Oh boy, what a game that was. This was developed by 2K Marin, the sort of offshoot studio that 2K sends its backburner games that were already based on existing popular franchises like BioShock, for example. They aren't particularly bad, they're just certainly the B team. That being said, there's no excuse for this garbage. If there was one phrase to describe the Bureau XCOM Declassified, it'd be Mass Effect ripoff that doesn't actually take any good elements of the game, which we can just shorten to Mass Effect ripoff. All the features are there. The cheap cover shooting that doesn't really feel like you're doing any damage with your guns, as contrasted to Mass Effect 2. The weird dialogue wheels that never let you say what you actually want to say and don't even tell you what you're actually going to say when you click on them. The characters are unlikable, unmemorable, and this whole game reeks of just sloppy work. A theory I thought of for why this is like that is the original XCOM reboot was going to be a cover shooter like this, but then after seeing the crazy amounts of backlash, they completely revamped everything and had to take what they already had and turn it into the Bureau, which would kind of make sense, like 2K Marin just now revamps all the story and what have you. But this is a bullshit theory that's probably wrong. What matters is the game exists, and it sucks. The tactical mode that they tried to push in order to sell it was just abysmal, because you had to actively walk your abilities like you were a person, which is havoc for thrown abilities, and even then, sometimes you couldn't actually get to the area you wanted to use a particular thing in. And while some of the abilities kind of synergize, with the most popular example being having an engineer deploy a turret and then floating this turret with some kind of pseudo-telekinesis to make it have more area of effect, it really feels like your abilities are blah. The game's story takes place in the United States at the height of the Cold War, where aliens invade, but we think it's the Soviets until we see actual aliens. And that's all I could really care about. The plot is contrived, it's entirely predictable, and you don't get attached to anyone. The game's slow, handles sluggishly, and in the first major mission, immediately the two main bosses you fight, the Muton and the Sectopod, are just thrown at you like art showcases. Oh, and by the way, you can beat any of these enemies by just backtracking through the nearest door threshold, because neither of them are properly modeled to walk through doors. I did this for nearly every boss in this game. You just run back through a door and they can't get you. Oh my god, why did anyone think this was something that needed to be salvaged or published? You know, walking back to XCOM Enforcer, this XCOM Enforcer actually looks good compared to this, because at least in XCOM Enforcer, you can run around being a mindless killing machine, even though we've abandoned all the tenets of XCOM. This game, while trying to be reminiscent of XCOM with low and high cover and using squad abilities and pretending there's research, but instead you just walk around the science lab and listen to audio clips a la Bioshock, it's just not worth it. But hey, we got the expansion XCOM, which renewed our faith in 2K, and finally XCOM 2. XCOM 2 was one of the best examples of a sequel I've seen in a long time. It takes all the original elements of the game and improves upon them, most particularly by adding in the element of surprise through stealth, lots of weapon customizability, and many more mission types that just feel a lot more rewarding than some of the mission types in the original XCOM. They also fixed the turn thing that a lot of people didn't like by adding a lot of abilities that refunded actions or didn't cost any actions at all, so you can use them out of turn if you felt it was necessary. The DLCs for this game were pretty good too. As far as story goes, which I actually did kind of care about the story in this one, in the last game you absolutely got your teeth kicked in by the aliens who now rule the world in some sort of harmonious world order, or so we think. However, something really sinister is going on. You, the commander, get pulled out of some sort of hypersleep by Old Man Sweater Bradford, and you gotta go stop Advent from doing God knows what. You'll eventually find out that the aliens themselves are running scared from some sort of other alien force, and you end up ruining everything for them. The last shot of the game in the ending cinematic hints at some sort of interesting sequel coming that's gonna be a hybrid of the aliens from XCOM Apocalypse and the ones from Terror from the Deep, which I'd be really excited to see how that turns out. And speaking of the future for XCOM, well, not directly XCOM, Julian Gollop recently launched a FIG campaign, which is kind of like Kickstarter ran by game devs, and we'll ignore some other things about it real quick because holy crap, this game he's making called Phoenix Point looks really exciting and like a great return to form for the XCOM series, which I personally would be really happy if this series ran alongside XCOM. Just the more XCOM the merrier. Speaking of other spiritual successors, Xenonauts, while not an XCOM game, really deserves honorable mention here, as it's a great return to the original playstyle by Goldhawk Interactive that I personally have sank a lot of hours into. If we can take anything away from all these games and all their extremely very critical receptions and overall quality, is that XCOM itself is inherently a good series that needs to be put in good hands, otherwise it becomes an awful game. I know we all can think of one series or another that's left us absolutely betrayed, and for me, that was the Age of XCOM games that I was lucky enough never to play when they were new. I for one, am so glad right now that XCOM's on the upswing, and I can only hope the future holds as good of things as I think it does. That's all for now. If you liked the video, be sure to subscribe, and if you really like me, be sure to support me on Patreon. And until next time, I'll see you around.